Welcome to Aviation United by Aviation Zorro. I'm delighted to be chatting with author, freelance writer, podcaster who is passionate about encouraging individuals on a transformational journey towards positive changes, particularly following times of loss in their life, be it the loss of a known and trusted way of life or a loss of a loved one. Shelley F Knight. A very good day to you, Shelley. How are you getting on?
Really good, thank you. Really good.
Wonderful. So we have to kick this off. I said this before the podcast starts. So where are you right now on the planet?
So right now I'm in Northampton in the Midlands in the UK in my office. Well, actually it's my husband's office because he's got all the geeky techie stuff I need.
Oh,
but
right.
Originally, you'll love this, I actually grew up next to Stansted Airport.
Oh,
I'm actually
wow.
Yeah, so I thought you'd like that. So I went to Stansted Mount Fidget High School and my parents are still down there. So yeah,
Was
little
that near Bishop
aviation stuff.
Stortford, is it?
That is, yeah. Yeah.
Is it Takeley? Is it Takeley near there?
Oh my God. You're absolutely right. Yeah. So my dad lived in Takeley for a while and all around there. So yeah, I am a little aviator at heart.
Oh, you must have loving all the airplanes coming into land every 2 minutes. It must have been a joy.
Yeah. My mum loves it. It's one of her favorite things to watch planes coming in. She loves it.
All right. Okay. I'm sure the airlines would be delighted to hear that.
Give her a wave.
Is Northampton, is that a posh part of the UK, is it? Or England?
Not that I've noticed, no.
Right, we'll spruce it up on TripAdvisor just to make it as posh as possible. So generally, as I said, I usually sidetrack off other stuff anyway. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, Shelley?
Yeah, so I actually come from a nursing background. I went into nursing as a little small student back in 2001. And I loved it and worked in acute medicine, the very fast-paced kind of level of nursing. But life's kind of full of curveballs. And so my mum called me one day, New Year's Day, to say that my stepdad had died suddenly. And it's quite funny, really, because my mum's a counsellor of many decades experience. But the way she broke the bad news was, David is dead, like three words after a 20-year career.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
so I was in acute. Yeah. So that's how I got the news that my beautiful stepdad had died. And I sort of, you try and go back to work after loss and things like that. But it really hit me. And I was kind of the nurse that got that call. So from there, I moved into hematology and oncology. And sadly, there's a lot of end of life with that. And it's where kind of my career is now. It was that turning point. I felt really privileged that I was working people at the end of life because I didn't have that with my stepdad. He just went suddenly. And it's from there that I started to observe grief and, how precious our life is. I then had more curveballs flung at me, thrown at me, whatever you could do with them, and took a career break. And it was then I started looking at the spiritual aspects of life and death and trained as a clinical hypnotherapist. I did return to nursing. By then I'd started writing my first book, but I think something had changed in me, like my spirituality, the way that so much paperwork. It's like a small fire hazard now in nursing with all the paperwork. And so I left last year, and that's where I'm now at, like writing about grief, nursing, the spiritual and things like that.
So what's the book called? We might as well get the plug in now.
Well, my first book was called Positive Changes, a Self-Kick book. And it's like self-help, but with an extra kick. It's got the feisty nursing humour in it. And then my second book, Good Grief, is out in 2021. And that's about the 30 years in healthcare, observing grief.
And where can you buy these? Is it on Amazon or in stores or?
Yeah, so Positive Changes on Amazon, all online retailers, and Good Grief will be out next year.
We're looking forward to read that. That'll be quite an interesting read. So can I ask generally, what is grief? We hear this a lot. Can you explain it very simplified or?
Yeah, so grief, it's really multifaceted and it's quite hard to define it in one simple sentence because it's so complex. But in a nutshell, I say that grief is our reaction to losing anything with which we have an emotional connection. So it's not just death of a loved one, it's when we lose anything with which we have a connection. So it could be like even if we lose our job, finances, health, safety, confidence, way of life. All of these can trigger a grief response. So it's when we lose something which is precious to us.
And is grief and bereavement, are they the same, or is it just like a twist of words in the English language? Are they similar?
They are similar, and I try and clarify this a lot in my second book because I think they're so interchangeable, like grief, bereavement and mourning, but they're slightly different according to Shelley's world.
All right.
So to me, bereavement and mourning are sort of part of the grief umbrella, but they're not the whole experience of grief. So grief is the normal reaction to losing something or someone, whereas bereavement is just when you lose a loved one or unloved one, as the case may be. So bereavement's just to loss of a life. Mourning, to me, it's not the authentic grief process. It's more an external expression. So like when there's a religious belief or a cultural belief that they will tell you how to mourn. So like some people say you have to mourn for, I think, is it the Catholics say it's like you have to mourn for a year and a day, and
Yes.
Chinese thinks it's 100 days. Buddhists will say 90 days. I think Sikhism is around like 10 days. So that's more, you're told how to mourn, how to grieve, but it's not an authentic expression. So they're slightly different to me.
So what about emotions then? I mean, you see, I mean, obviously sometimes in Hollywood movies or TV shows is depicted. I mean, some people are quite emotional where they're, you know, they come across like they're banging the coffin and they're screaming, "No, I've lost a loved one." And then other people will be quite silent, to be showing no emotion. So what emotions can people feel when they have lost someone or something?
Yeah, all the above.
Okay.
It's, you know, it's kind of like acting normal in an abnormal situation almost. So when we lose something, the emotions are just so heightened. But I think we do have this perception that they have to be negative emotions. I think grief's always a very negative thing, whereas actually you can see so many things. I mean, some people have hope or relief. Some might have a spiritual emergence. But, you know, we hear about the 5 stages of grief, don't we? The denial, the anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But in my observations over 30 years, it's not linear. You don't have to have all 5. You know, some people go from A to B, others' grief journey, if you plotted it, would look like a bowl of spaghetti all over the place. But yeah, emotions are there. And I think some of them are so closely related. I used to see really angry families, and that's like breaking bad news or when someone's died. They were so angry with the staff. But I think actually like anger and fear are quite closely connected. I think grief and love, you know, it's very hard to define what is that pure emotion you're expressing. But yeah, you can get like sad, disbelief, hope, guilt. You might feel numb, raw, empty, regretful. And then on top of all the emotions, you then have like, you know, the physical, the mental, the behavioral and social impacts as well. So it can be a really messy time.
And then with relationships as well. I mean, I know myself is that my brother passed away a few years back, and it's kind of an interesting one because you find that I don't think you change as a person, but you can't understand why the world around you is still continuing, if that makes sense. You kind of you've lost somebody and you come outside, but the world is still the same. And I found that kind of a bit tricky to handle myself. But I mean, what about relationships? I mean, how can they be affected, or even work life? How can that be affected by losing somebody or grief?
I think, you know, people say you never get over grief, and I don't think I wholeheartedly agree. I think we just change with grief, and I think all relationships change, but mostly I think the relationship with ourselves changes. We define ourselves so often by the person we was with, like whether it's like, you know, you're the child of the parent that died, or you're the sibling, or you're the friend. And when you take away that person out of your equation, you think, who am I? You know, who am I as a sibling? Who am I as a child without a parent? So I think, you know, the relationship with ourselves changes. And I think we can, you know, gain a greater understanding of ourselves. I think we're stronger than we give ourselves credit for. I think we're more resilient as well. So our relationship with ourselves changes, but then everyone around us as well, because people don't know what to say to us and they avoid us, or they say the wrong thing, you know. So all relationships have like this ripple effect. You know, that's what I said earlier, like grief isn't simple because, you know, it's the emotions, the physical signs and symptoms, how we change as a person, how our life changes, how people see us. So yeah, it's a really messy time, or time of great change at least.
What about Shelley then? When, I mean, you probably heard it yourself, and when, say, a few months have gone past, when somebody has, you know, you've lost somebody, and then you get an individual popping up to you and they say, "Oh, sure, it's been a few months, you know, how are you getting on there, and have you moved on?" I mean, is that normal? Is that going back to what you said there, that some people don't know what to say? It's more of an awkwardness.
Yeah, I think there is that, but I'd always rather someone said something than nothing. I think so many people just, like when my beautiful stepdad died, my own family would cross the road. You see them zigzagging through Bishop Stortford, and you'd be like, I'm in grief. I'm not blind. I can still see what you're doing. And I think I'd always someone said something rather than nothing, because there's some courage in that. And I appreciate that, anyone being courageous. But I think people do have an expectation that, grief has a timeline or something, and we should be ticking this checklist like it's been 3 months. How are you doing? But it's always hard, actually. I think the first few months afterwards are really hard. Like when my stepdad died, I was actually signed off work after 3 months.
Oh, okay.
Because, you have those practicalities at first, like the rather macabre way of choosing which coffin you'd like him to have, where do you want him to be buried, order the flowers, who's having what belongings. And people like a purpose, so they're rallying around, aren't they? And they're helping.
Yes.
But then their life goes back to normal, and you're trying to find your new normal. And it is those months when you start to be alone with your thoughts and your new normal that you start to feel a bit, So, it's quite a strange time, because people have gone, and that's when your thoughts start to bubble up. But I don't know if you know, but I set up a death cafe here in Northampton, because I was really aware that people think after 3 months, 5 years, 10 years, we should no longer be grieving or talking about it. And we can be left feeling really unheard. And I'm all for grief healing. I think we always need to tell the story, keep the memories alive, turn our mess into a message and things like that. So I've got a death cafe here, and we meet up and we can talk. We know what's on the agenda. We're going to talk about death. And I think it's important to always keep talking, always keep healing.
And how does that get out there, that with a death cafe? I mean, are people kind of a little bit anxious to attend? Is it quite an open platform, or is it just like part of the norm that there's a death cafe down there and we can pop in and chat about our grief? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I think I've just really blessed. I've attracted the most amazing people, and there's so much laughter. I just love it. But it is like going on a first date. There is that awkwardness of walking in. What is the expectations? But the agenda is we're going to talk about death, grief. That's the expectation. So it's just lovely. It's a pop-up event like every month or so, and we just come together and talk. And it's not unique. I'm not unique. There's they're in 65 countries around the world. But I just thought it was really needed. I knew from my nursing days that whilst I was nursing a patient who was dying, the impact on the family left behind was profound. Like their life almost died when their loved one did. And I just knew there were people out there that needed a little something.
I think that's amazing. I mean, I'd love to know more. I mean, this probably sounds a bit bizarre, but I'll say it anyway. I mean, do you get people walking past and there's a bit of laughter going inside? Are people telling stories, maybe funny stories about their loved ones? And then people outside are going, geez, I thought that was a death cafe. Is that, I mean, you know what I mean? Is that like, because stereotypically you'd be thinking, oh geez, there must be a lot of sadness going on there. But if I know in an Irish type of environment, sometimes we kind of celebrate the life of some, and sometimes the dinner event after the funeral can get quite interesting, and there's a lot of laughter. But it's not to be disrespectful to the person who's passed away. They actually enjoy hearing some nice stories, and I just wonder if that's what it's like as well. Is there a bit of laughter going on at times, or is it's just very kind of serious chatting about how people are kind of coping and managing the situation?
I think a lot of the laughter, if I'm honest, probably comes from saying, you'd never guess what someone said to me. And it is the people that are just saying the most, I don't know, I think the awkward things that they say, but I would always, that someone said something, rather than silence or cross the road like I had. I think if you can hear someone saying something, even if it's bizarre or totally out of order,
yeah,
they're present, you can hear them, you're not invisible. And there's a real beauty in that. But yeah, we sort of laugh about the things that people say, the expectations of what we should be doing or feeling. And some of it is what's your happiest memory of your loved one? How do you want to be remembered? We talk about writing your own eulogy and things like that. And it is, genuine humour. But it's beautiful. I mean, friendships are formed from it. It's just a really beautiful place.
That's a bit. I don't know if there's any in Ireland. Are you aware? Is there any death cafe in Ireland? Is there? Do you know? Or
I don't know.
Well, maybe you should set one up here. Honestly, I think it sounds a fascinating thing.
Can I ask you then, Shelley? You had mentioned previously that after a few months you were signed off work. So can I ask, how did your employer handle that, or how did you feel?
It's quite strange. And I suppose it was one of those niggles that probably left me thinking, do I really want to be a nurse? So on the day it happened, when my mum called and said, David is dead, they were amazing. They gave me a healthcare assistant who walked me home. And then a partner at the time, like, drove me back home down to Essex near the airport. And, they were brilliant in that moment. Then the ward phoned that night. And I thought, oh, bless them, they're seeing how I'm doing. But there's actually phoning to ask when would I be back at work. And I wasn't impressed.
Right.
And I didn't have an answer. So it wasn't really, they were in a caring career, but I didn't really feel that I was cared for. So I carried on. But then obviously the only way to grieve is to grieve. So 3 months later, it caught up with me and I was signed off because it was just really mucky. And I hadn't processed it at the time because I kind of rushed back to work. I think, I don't think there was a lot of support. I mean, this is just from my nursing. There wasn't a lot of support around at all. And I think it's so important that we have support, but it wasn't there for me. And I think it's probably one of the reasons I do the Death Cafe. I don't want people to feel unsupported. There's so many people around us. We should all help each other. And I'm just saying, really passionate about that. And because I didn't have that support, it's why I'm passionate about providing it now. But no, it was mucky. And, you could question if I'd had that support initially, that time initially to grieve, would I have been signed off 3 months down the line? I don't know. I believe things happen for a reason. But I wasn't really supported in my grief.
So a little bit of negativity has brought a bit of positivity because you've set up the Death Cafe. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. And I believe things happen for a reason, like the whole getting the call on the ward. I thought I was going to be in acute medicine for years. But actually I ended up in haematology and oncology. And I loved that. And I loved, the end of life, the privilege of that role. And here I am, writing books about it, death cafes, podcasting about it. So I'm a great believer that, I needed that sort of spiritual kick to get me where I am today.
You've met your calling.
Yes.
And that's why we're here chatting. Unfortunately for you, you're chatting to me. But anyway, that's there's always a positive, negative in life. So what about then, I know we kind of briefly touched on it, but dealing with grief, I know we spoke about the emotions and stuff like that, but what could you recommend, to deal with it? Just lock yourself away in a room, talk to somebody. So what would you suggest our listeners to do if they are experiencing grief?
Whatever they need to do, and that sounds really bad, but the thing is, grief is a little bit like our fingerprints. We all have them, but they're all unique to us. They're not going to be like anyone else's, and that is your grief, really, that it's yours. There is no timeline, there is no checklist, because that'd be so easy, wouldn't it, if we could just tick a box. But I just think there's so many things we can do. As I said earlier, I think there's so many negative connotations about grief that it has to be really painful and your life is over. And I know people will feel like that. I totally get that. But I think from working in end of life, the fact that we're still alive is such a privilege, and it's something I'm really passionate about. So I encourage people to be resilient, find the lesson in the grief and move on, whether it's to live in memory of that person and make them proud because you faced your own mortality. I just think there has to be a movement of moving forward, because my dad always used to say, life goes on. And that's what my branding, like Shelley F Knight, life goes on. And it does, not the way we might have wished, hoped or foreseen, but it does go on. And so I always say to create a small positive change, whether it's, getting up early in the morning, spending 10 minutes alone with your thoughts, if it's doing more exercise to clear your head, just always create a small positive change. Just don't get stuck in your grief.
Can I ask then, Shelley, obviously, with the COVID-19 at the moment, that there's a lot of job losses around the world, and there's the aviation, aerospace, tourism and hospitality industries, a lot of people are affected by that. How would you put a positive spin on that? Because you see a lot where a lot of people, say aviation professionals in particular, are posting a lot of stuff on social media and they're saying they've lost their job after 4 or 5 years. And obviously they're upset. But how would you put a positive spin on somebody that's lost their job? Would you tell them, like, you've had a great time, you've had a good 4 years or 5 years, and move on to the next adventure? Is that probably the best way to handle it, or is there any other advice?
No, I wrote about this quite for quite a few magazines because I was just really aware, like even in 30 years of healthcare, I was really aware of the profound effects of COVID. And I spoke about, I called it isolation grief initially, but in my book it's called pandemic grief. And there's just like a collective loss around the world, that we have loss of normality. We can't see our friends go to work, have the financial security, and then people were dying of COVID and we couldn't be by their side, and we naturally want to be with our loved ones when they're dying. Then we couldn't go to the funeral, and it's just like loss after loss after loss. So I think it's a really difficult time, and I think we'll see the impact of this grief for many, many years to come. So I wouldn't say like, things happen for a reason, or you'll get over it. I think, that collectively there's so much pain in the world right now. I have seen a collateral beauty in the loss, in the people who've been in these jobs for years, and they've been living with, beyond their means, or they've been doing a job they didn't love. Lots of these people, for them, it's a real positive. They're having that kick they wanted to do, a more meaningful job or a more spiritual job. Or, they were at risk of burnout for working so much. And actually when they stopped and slowed down, they've seen a new way of life. But for many, I just think it's a really awful time. Do you know what I mean? Like even here in my house, my positive is that I finished my next book 18 months early, which is fabulous. My husband's been out of work since March. He's applied for 50 jobs. He still hasn't got a job. There's positive and negatives. Yeah. And so I wouldn't tell people to carry on or things happen for a reason as such, but I would ask people to, like any grief, really look at what's happening for them. Who are they without that job role? Who are they without that financial income? What's important to them? What do they want in their life? What do they not want? A real audit of their life. Because I think when you're at rock bottom or feel that you're dipping down, when you hit rock bottom, the only way is up. And it's a really good time to just sit and think what you want. But no, I think it's so hard for so many people. So, there's not going to be a positive for everyone, but I would encourage people to search for a positive or a glimmer of hope, or that one thing that they're going to do each day.
So stay strong. If anybody's listening to this, stay strong.
Well, you can cry and you can snot, sleep, repeat if you want to, but just find something that pulls you forward rather than pulls you down. Do you know what I mean? Like just journal how you're feeling for 10 minutes a day. Get outside's really powerful, I think, because we are so isolated and inside, stepping outside. But just find something that moves you forward. But I just think it is a really difficult time for so many.
Did you say, Shelley, was it snot, sleep, repeat? Is that what's not sleep, repeat?
So people, like, it's another grief thing, isn't it? That when people say like, oh, like my mum's died, or I've lost my job, or my dog's not well, all these losses we're having, people are saying, oh, be strong. And I'm like, just grieve the hell you want to. I don't believe in being strong. Like people say, oh, be strong by your mum's bedside. You don't want her last thing of you to be you crying. Why not? Do you know what I mean? We're not robots. We have emotions. And so I wouldn't say be strong. I'd say be authentic. I'd also encourage people to reach out to their healthcare professionals. My mum as a counsellor always says the answers are within us, but sometimes we need support external to us. So, if you are struggling, don't wait till it gets really bad and overwhelming and things like that. Do reach out for help from a friend, a healthcare professional, Mother Nature, hold on to something that's going to lift you up. But yeah, being strong, I think it's good to have a positive mindset, but you can cry, snot, repeat, you can be positive, but if those negative emotions come up, not that they're negative, they're just emotions, just be authentic in whatever you're feeling.
So can I twist it then and go the opposite side? So say, for example, you're the friend or you're the individual that sees somebody that is grieving or struggling. How can you approach that with the person that you're seeing? Because yourself, sometimes you hear all this thing where people don't like to be bothered or annoyed these days. They're they're pressurized with life, with relationships, with jobs and work. So if you're that individual and you see somebody is struggling, how could you probably approach that to help them without being too annoying or overbearing?
My teenage son said I'm always annoying David, so it's a bit risky for me. So I think grief just changes all the time. We can have good days, bad days, and we get hit by a tsunami of emotion. So I like to say, how are you this morning? Shorten it down, not how are you? Because that's a huge umbrella, and grief is changing all the time. So, if you see them in the morning, how are you this morning? How are you today? To keep it concise. I also think that people often say, oh, where I am if you need me. When you're grieving or if you're depressed, you don't like to ask for help, let alone accept it. So I think it's better if you say to someone, what can I do for you today? What do you need me to do? How can I help you? It's just a slight tweak of what we think we're saying, but it's more open to being accepted. Because if you say, oh, where I am, people don't, and you feel awkward, and you're always really hyper aware that other people's life may be better than yours. So yeah, keep it concise. Like, how are you this morning, this evening? What can I do to help you? Tell me now. So yeah, just really help people, because sometimes, when you're grieving, we feel just as awkward and can't find the words either. So yeah, kind of go in quite strong, maybe.
I think that's the reason why, Shelley, I've been blocked by everybody on Facebook and Instagram.
Is it?
It's because I'm kind of like I try to be I think I've learned a lesson from your advice here, because if I do see somebody, I'm kind of very forward about it, and I'll say, yeah, you okay? You need a bit of help? And I think what happens is they're like, oh, leave me alone. Go away from me. So I think I have to be more aware of that myself. So that's good advice, and I'll take that on board, and the listeners, you take it on board as well. So
yeah, we just need a little bit of encouragement, because I think when you're in grief, or if you're just that certain type of person, when people say, oh, where I am if you need me, I know that I don't ask people for help. I am so feisty. I think I'm going to have a really good go on my own, and that's not even in grief. And I always think, I've got this. I've so got this. I am enough. But if someone said, like, could I just do that for you? I'd be like, it's kind of already been answered, hasn't it, in the way you phrased it? And I'm like, oh, go on then. Yes. Walk the dog, steal a child, whatever you want, do it.
No, it's good. I learned my lesson now. So all my Facebook friends out there, I'm coming back to see you very, very soon. So we spoke briefly about your book. So what about the podcast? What can people expect from your podcast? And where can they find your podcast? Let's do the plug, social media, the whole caboodle. We spoke with the cafe already, but I want to get back to that later on. But yeah, so we're the podcast, and where can they find you on social media and your website? Okay,
so my life has been peppered by grief, not just with my patients, but my personal life. And I had a horrendous fertility journey. I mean, I think people are really quick to judge, aren't they? Like, we have 4 children, so people don't think I've had fertility problems. But David, I would have loved like 7 children, really, I think. Right. So I had really big struggles of having children. So at the end of my last pregnancy, which was horrific, I started to write Positive Changes, a self-kick book. And it's like self-help, but it's a bit of a kick, and it's got my warped humour in there. And there's no one way of how to create positive change. It's sort of things I tried but didn't work. There's warped humour, there's old blogs, there's tools, there's the lot. But my teenage son made me realise that not everyone reads a book. So I then turned it into Positive Changes, a self-kick podcast. And so it started off as a solo show, just me and my little book, just reading out the key themes and pain points, really, about, the search for happiness, who am I, the art of forgiveness and things like that. But it was a really beautiful journey that as people started to listen to the solo shows, they were sort of like, do you know what? I've created a positive change, and this is what worked for me. Could I share? So I thought, oh yeah, come on, I'll have 6 guests on, that'd be fine. But I absolutely loved it. It's like the nursing without the drug rounds, really, that I just get all this life experience, all the stories, all the inspiration, the tears. I'm left speechless, which is amazing because I'm very chatty. And we're now on episode 22-ish, I think.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so I am no longer a solo show. Yeah, Yeah. So it's every Wednesday, Positive Changes, a self-kick podcast comes out with a new guest. And, you know, they're just beautiful. It's, you know, postnatal depression, there's grief. We've had funeral directors on, overcoming addiction, near-death experience. It's just amazing. So it's other people's positive changes and the tools they use. So, you know, if you read my book and thought, very nice, Shelley, but it's not for me, you could listen to someone else.
Oh, okay.
Or you could do both. You could buy the book, listen to the podcast.
And where can they find the podcast? Is it on your website, shelleyfknight.com?
Yeah, you can get it there. It's on all platforms, and you can even listen to it on Shelley F Knight YouTube channel. And I don't know why, I'm one of these girls, feel the fear and do it anyway. So I don't like being visible. So if I write a book, I'm behind my computer. If I podcast, I'm behind a mic. You can't see me. But again, teenage son showed us that, you know, people don't read books, don't listen to podcasts, but YouTube's very in. So I set up this YouTube channel, not really knowing what I'm doing, David, if I'm honest.
Oh, don't worry about it. Nobody does.
Yeah.
We're all pretending. That's it.
Yeah. And I thought, I'm going to get visible, because some people like to watch videos. And if it helps someone to move on or save a life, you know, from creating a positive change when you're feeling really low, I'll do it. For the sake of mankind, I'll go out there and I'll do it. So I started it with these really bad lockdown routes. So that's quite worth subscribing to anyway. So yeah, you can have the podcast on the normal platforms, but also YouTube if you like to look at bad routes.
Bad routes?
Yeah, well, my hair.
But your hair is red, is it? Is it red?
It's brown this time. It's now gone back to dark brown. That's not my natural colour either.
Right.
Yeah.
No comment.
Yeah. I deal with death and dying, and my hair has a lot of dying as well. So it's just, you know.
Right, okay. Just checking. All right. Because I have your website up here in front of me, shelleyfknight.com. Yeah, and I can see your picture here. So you've changed the tone now. Is it the colours moved onto a different Dulux paint type of colour?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, YouTube, it's kind of like strawberry pink with a little blonde. This week, I think I'm brown. I think I'd had my hair done by then, so I think I'm brown on this week's YouTube video.
Right. Is this a weekly event, is it? Or
yeah, every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday you change. Okay, so what are we expecting next week? Or is there some more to come?
Don't know. I'll wash it. It's a bit lighter, I suppose.
Right. So where else then can the listeners get in touch? I mean, are you on Instagram, Twitter, and all this wonderful social media platforms?
So I'm really active on Shelley F Knight Life Goes On Facebook page, and Shelley F Knight on Instagram. As I say, I've got the YouTube channel. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got the website. And if you subscribe on my website to the newsletter, I'll keep you up to date with Good Grief when it comes out. And even Good Grief Northampton Cafe has its own Facebook page.
I'm looking at it right here as we.
There you go.
And it's the next date is Zoom meeting. It's the 9th of September, 7 to 7:30.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, just checking in with people. Yeah.
And I mean, I wanted to get back to this. I mean, have you any? I know it sounds terrible when you talk about death and stuff like that. Is there any humor stories you've experienced over doing all of this wonderful work that was actually something of humor? In other words, sometimes we believe that death is quite somber at times and serious. Was there anything? I mean, I could probably tell you one or two stories myself, but have you anything that you'd like to share?
I don't think so from the Death Cafe, but in my nursing, like when I used to say to people, like, you know, I work in haematology, oncology, and end of life, people would be like, they'd give me that look, David, as if to say, you poor cow, you must have been really evil in a past life kind of look.
Right. You have a dark sense of humor, have you?
Yeah.
Right.
And so people just look at me like and feel really sorry for me, but it was the best job in the world. And there was this amazing gentleman, like men at the end of life can be so humorous. Right. I think they just think, sod it, what have I got to lose? And so there were a few guys queuing for the toilet on the ward. And then this one just walked up, it was a really tall, gorgeous gentleman, just walked up and he goes, do you mind if I go first? I've only got 3 months to live.
Okay.
I just loved it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, don't want to spend the end of your days queuing for a toilet. But there is so much humour. I think at the end of life, we realise like how often we get things so wrong. Do you know what I mean? That we just, do these jobs that don't fulfill us. We stay in these relationships that aren't for us. We cling on to money more than hope, and you get to this end of life and you just think, actually, the most important thing in life is connection, a sense of belief. And, I think we can either laugh at ourselves or cry. And I always tend to go with the humor.
Yes, no, I think it's right. So the Death Cafe is on, as you said, Facebook, and there's no other way of there's no website for Death Cafe, is there? It's just through Facebook.
No.
Fair me. No, that's great. I mean, it's a great platform for people to reach out. So as Shelley's mentioned as well, it's a Zoom meeting only Wednesday, 9 to September. Oh, so how do they sign up if people want to get in touch with the Death Cafe? Is it via Facebook? They send a message?
Yeah, so they can go onto Facebook. There'll be posts coming up just to say, like, if you want the Zoom meeting link, like, message me on Shelley F Knight, Life Goes On, or here on the Northampton Death Cafe. So just like Facebook Messenger, and I just send out the link. It's quite sad because not so many people engage with the virtual event, and I just really miss the humor and the connection, because that's one of the most important things in life. But the meetings are still going ahead, but I can't wait till we're all back in our little circle of cackles.
Yeah, no, the sooner the better. I just want to say thank you so much, Shelley, for joining me today. You've given great insight, a lot of humor, especially when we're talking about grief, bereavement, and death. So thank you so much. As Shelley said, you can catch her out with the Death Cafe, which is on Facebook, and shelleyfknight.com. So thank you so much for joining me today on Aviation by Aviation Zorro. Thank you, Shelley.
Oh, thank you. It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.